man's creation. Back to J. Vernon McGee. In the first chapter, we saw that there was nothing, and then the inorganic came into existence. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The next step in creation was the organic, that is, the creation of life. We saw that in verse 21, where it says that God created great whales and then all animal life. It's interesting that instead of as we learned yesterday about starting at amoeba, God starts off at the biggest animal, the whale. He created animal life, but apparently the plant life had not been destroyed. And at the time of the recreation, the seed was already in the earth. I would not want to be dogmatic, but this would seem to be the implication here. God has told us very little in this regard. That man, in the next step, is the next step in the creation. There is actually no natural transition, and evolution cannot bridge the gap that brings us to the appearance of Homo sapiens unto the earth. Remember, I said I want you to realize evolution is a very uh, prejudiced uh, uh, belief system. It's a religion that teaches to be prejudiced against certain races. The earth, therefore, was prepared for the coming of man. And so, verse 7 And the Lord formed man in the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. This is the method of the creation of man, and again, we are limited to what God has told us physically. Man was taken out of the ground. It is quite interesting that our bodies are made up of about 15 to 16 chemical elements. Those same chemical elements are in the ground. The physical part of man was taken out of the dust of the ground. If we were to be boiled down into separate chemical elements, of which we are made, we would be worth very little in terms of money. I used to say $2.98, but inflation has increased that figure a little. I remember James Floyd used quote told that years ago when I was a little kid. You know, he used J. Vernon McGee and didn't give him credit. Well, that's why I feel me reading the commentary and giving him credit. I think J. Vernon McGee would be a little bit more acceptable of that. Well, actually, I believe in one case he did say that I could use it. I think the proviso was that I could deliver it better than he did, which I don't know if I can do that. But he does seem to want people to use his materials, and was glad that they did. He does say that we should give people credit when credit is due, and that we probably uh, should not read it word for word, but I found that later. That is the extent of our bodily worth, because we were made out of the dust of the ground. But man is more than dust. Physically, dust he is, and to dust he will return. But his spirit is going to God. Why? Because God breathed into the nostrils the breath of life, and man comes and became a living soul. God breathed into him the breath of life. God gave him life, which is physical or psychological, and then he gave him life, which is spiritual. And Daryl has that underscored. I think I'm reading out of Daryl's commentary, and he's the one that took the cover off of. We have Daryl's, I've got Don Reese's, and then I've got My uncle Amos gave me a set whenever I was. I think we found out I was 19 or 20 up for my birthday one year, and so I've got three sets, but and so I'm using Daryl's because it's in the best shape. It won't be by the time I get done. I'm sorry, but in other words, man now is brought into a marvelous relationship with his Creator. He has in his being a capacity for God. This is what separates man from all other creatures. Uh, hey, Laronda, glad you're watching. She says, heart, 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 rose, 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 present, 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 love you. I love you too. That are found in God's universe. As far as we know, of course, there are the angels, but we know very little about them. The theistic evolutionists say that mankind evolved up to this point, and then God began to work with uh, with this product of evolution. However, no form of evolutionary theory can account for human speech. It cannot account for human uh, conscience, and it cannot account for human individuality. These are three things with which evolution has a little difficulty. It is mighty easy to take the bones of a man and compare them to the bones of some anthropoid, probably an ape, or to a horse. There is a striking similarity, I am sure, and yet there is a wide divergence also. I would expect that there would be a certain similarity because these creatures are to move in the same environment in which we move as human beings. Supernatural, or naturally, I'm sorry, the uh, the chassis would have to be the same. For example, there is a very striking similarity between the chassis of a Ford automobile and that of a Chevy automobile. But you had better not say that to the Ford Motor Company or to General Motors. They will tell you that there is a wide difference between the two. But there is a very striking similarity when you see the chassis. You must begin with something fixed on which you can put four wheels, one on each corner, and it must be rectangular to a certain extent. Why? Because the Ford and the Chevy are both going to get stuck on the freeway at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been on the 5 and the 10, stuck from 5 to 10 o'clock at night. So that's why that people who complain about the lengths of my podcast, I'm like, well, you've never been stuck on the 5 or the 10 coming out of Los Angeles at 5 o'clock, because you'll be there and you'll be begging me to go on for 5 hours instead of this is going to be less than an hour today. Jay Vernon's is 30 minutes. So a car must be able to balance, and it must have a motor to move it. So you would have a similarity, but that does not mean they came out of the same factory. I feel that such an uh, exaggeration has been made of the similarity between man and these other creatures. Man is a different creature. God breathed into his breathing place the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Man is fearfully and wonderfully made, and that is something which we need to keep in mind. And then Chuck Smith said about verse 7, the likeness of God's ability to fellowship with God. So he created man in God's image so that man would have the ability to fellowship with God. He wanted him, that was man's purpose in our life, is for us to be able to fellowship with him. So we have to keep that in mind. If we're not fellowshipping with God, uh, we read His Bible. That's the way He talks to us, and we pray, and that's the way we talk to Him. If we're not fellowshipping with Him, we fellowship with other Christians. We talk about God with them, and so He is there in amongst us, and so He wants that fellowship, and He yearns for it, and longs for it, like a lover longs to even be in the presence of the person that they love. The next section